Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing Flying Blind, the 737 MAX tragedy, and the fall of Boeing. This is a very fine work by Peter Robison. He takes us from how Boeing started as a pretty humble company, engineering driven, with a motto of, let's say, no nerds, no birds, to its merger with the real failure that McDonnell Douglas was. He also manages, apart from the technical writing and the business writing, he also gives us the human angle by introducing us to the families that were affected by the loss of their family members due to this avoidable negligence of Boeing. There's obviously a larger story here that this corrosive profit at all costs mentality that Boeing has is not unique. It's something that many other companies have taken on, outsourcing, cutting costs. And even if it were to be successful, which in many ways it hasn't in those industries, it's fine if you want to try that with coffee or with sneakers or something like that. But when you're trying it with these planes that have effects on people's lives, if your sneaker is made poorly, the worst thing, your sneaker is going to break, but your life isn't going to be endangered. But if these things are made badly, what's going to happen is exactly what happened, which is deaths. Obviously, the book is centered in the subtitle around the 737 MAX aircraft, all the compromises and failures that Boeing was involved in that led to the crashes of that Lion Air flight in Indonesia and the Ethiopian Air flight in Africa. And both of these companies had models of the MAX that did not have an optional angle of attack sensor light. If those planes had had that, then the pilots would have known what was going on, or at least they would have had some clue about how to fix it. But what happened was this was part of Boeing's cost-cutting measures to deliver maximum profits to shareholders. Was they had not only made that sensor optional, but they had deleted the mention of MCAS, which was the software system that would point the nose down if the angle of attack sensor was being affected in a particular way. They deleted it from the pilot's manual. So I want you to think about that for a moment. In trying to compete with Airbus, which had so many basic safety features as standard, Boeing decided it was going to go the other way to maximize profits and to basically create stripped down planes, which one could even make the argument if you're talking about non-essential materials, like let's say the type of flooring that you're using inside the plane, okay, who cares? You're welcome to do that. But when you're talking about economizing on gauges in the cockpit, it just, especially such a crucial one as the angle of attack sensor, it's nuts to me. And it's just one more thing that underlines, I think, the what we see in our age, which is the moral failure of capitalism. By only chasing profits at all costs and having money, quote unquote, shareholder results, shareholder value, whatever you want to call it, as its maximum moral value, its supreme ethical value. Not only do we see that this outsourcing model for Boeing has failed, it's failed for a lot of other companies. We saw it get crushed during the pandemic as supply chains got extended and broken. Some of them are still broken to this day, so many years later. It not only doesn't work as an idea, it's very fragile. Fragile ideas should be examined, but it ended up costing more money. So it wasn't even something that was financially smart. It was something that was logistically stupid and financially stupid. And I mean, Boeing is a disgrace. It's a disgrace to the United States, and it will take a long time, if anyone even wants to take up the task of trying to fix such a broken company, to fix it. The thing is, I don't think people will stop flying on Boeing aircraft. I think even if there's another 2 or 3 crashes of not only the 737 MAX, but of the Dreamliner or any other Boeing aircraft, people are going to keep going. The 737 MAX was grounded for almost 2 years, I think something like 20 months. People got on the MAX by a large majority the day that it came back into service. So I just think people are not willing to give up air travel. And that's neither good nor bad. That's up to them if they want to fly on a riskier aircraft. But I think that a company that probably murders its whistleblowers, I think it would be a big stretch of the imagination to believe that the 2 whistleblowers that are dead so far just was some kind of accident or coincidence. But it just underlines Boeing is quote unquote too big to fail. Even I would say to an extent of murder. That's how much Boeing has to be protected, is whistleblowers have to be murdered. And I'd like to say that's a shame, but I mean, you want to talk about an understatement saying that that's a shame. I mean, okay, so let's talk about some of the ideas in the book. Let's start with culture differences between McDonnell Douglas and Boeing. This was when there was a strike happening with the engineers, and the McDonnell Douglas folks were trying to mediate. Three federal mediators were brought in to try to resolve the standoff. After one resolution attempt failed, one of the mediators shared his own doubts that the merged company could survive. The mediators were supposed to stay neutral, but in a moment of frustration at the hotel where talks were taking place, he confided that he saw the partnership as doomed. The executives who'd come from McDonnell Douglas, he said, were hunter-killer assassins, and those from Boeing, Boy Scouts. And those hunter-killer assassins, many of them were trained by Jack Welch, or protégés of his. People have to die before Boeing will change things, Eubank was told by his manager. There's also a unique problem in the United States in regards to the regulatory agency, which is the FAA, and its relationship to the NTSB. So rather than me trying to explain it, this paragraph, these couple paragraphs will explain it much better. The FAA owed its existence, in fact, to a crash. On June the 30th, 1956, two passenger planes, a Trans World Airlines Super Constellation L-1049 and a United Airlines DC-7, collided 21,000 feet over the Grand Canyon, killing 128 people and scattering wreckage across two buttes. Hikers still come across glinting metal fragments of seatbelt buckles or aircraft skin. It was the worst accident in aviation history to that point and prompted Congress to create the FAA as an independent agency in 1958, replacing a predecessor that had been housed in the Department of Commerce. The new agency had a mandate to ensure safety and better control the national airspace, but the language of its founding act made clear that it wouldn't stray far from its commercial roots. The FAA was also to ensure the promotion, encouragement, and development of civil aeronautics. So this agency is supposed to police the aircraft industry, but it's also supposed to encourage it. You want to talk about a conflict of interest built right in? Crucially, a separate body that investigated accidents and made safety recommendations, now known as the National Transportation Safety Board, had no authority to impose its findings. This was left to the FAA, which has long been torn between its dual mandates of encouraging growth and maintaining safety. In part citing cost, the agency declined to impose NTSB guidance on radar, runway lighting, de-icing protocols, and cargo bay smoke detectors. The NTSB somewhat degradingly releases a most wanted list of safety improvements to gain at least some leverage. Among those the FAA still hasn't addressed, I think to this day, a recommendation for cockpit recorders capable of recording images as well as voice to speed accident investigations. I mean, that's a great idea. I don't know why it's not done, but there it is. At one point, Boeing managers asked for input from the FAA engineering staff on a particular staff appointment. So Boeing would appoint its own regulators, appoint its own overseers, which is unbelievable. Giving the lie to their efforts at consultation, they ended up choosing the person who had received the most objections from the FAA, according to a report prepared by a group of the agency's unions. Boeing also promoted another person whose FAA evaluations had shown a, quote, consistent lack of integrity, unsound judgment, and an uncooperative attitude towards FAA. They chose the most unethical person to get promoted. Two crashes of the early 737. So let's move on to talking about this plane. Two crashes of the early 737s, a 737-200 in Colorado Springs in 1991 and a 737-300 near Pittsburgh in 1994, exposed the shortcomings of the more conservative strategy. After the longest investigation in the history of the National Transportation Safety Board, the authority finally assigned blame. The crashes had been the result of a faulty rudder design. One of Boeing's many compromises in its hasty design of the 737 had been the use of a single-paneled rudder. It lacked a device called a limiter, which made the plane more vulnerable to what's known as a hardover, an uncommanded deflection that appeared to happen only in extremely rare circumstances, such as when microscopic bits of grit got stuck in a valve. The tragedies were the first evidence that the 737, coaxed into new iterations across the decades, was being stretched beyond its own limits. As Bernard Loeb, the NTSB's aviation safety director, put it when the agency released its report in 1999, "We believe the airplane is trying to tell us something." Pilots who had flown the 737 next generation would complete their training for the MAX in a few hours on an iPad. Employees were still finding bugs in the manual in April of that year when the MAX started rolling out of assembly lines. Eventually, one more mistake would be discovered. An alert showing a discrepancy between the two angle of attack vanes wasn't lighting up on a majority of the MAX planes Boeing had started delivering. The alert was mistakenly tied to an optional indicator showing the raw angle of attack data, which most airlines, including Southwest and Lion Air, hadn't paid for. Boeing's engineers decided to defer a fix until the next software update in 2020. And because they delayed that, people died. And here, this just reiterates what we just heard, but in a more specific case. He and the mechanics never saw the alert that would have pinpointed the problem. AOA disagree, suggesting a discrepancy between the left and right angle of attack vanes. The reason? Lion Air hadn't paid for it. They had purchased a bare-bones MAX plane with no such indicator. Moreover, Boeing had never disclosed the potential issue to customers. Let's talk about the idea of outsourcing. In my world, the stock analyst said, the next word after coordination is cost. In a conversation with another Wall Streeter, as Sorcer argued against excessive cost cutting, the analyst quickly cut him off. "What you're saying is you're different," he said. "Everybody thinks they're different, but nobody is different. This works for everybody. It works for running shoes, ladies' garments, hard drives, cell phones, integrated circuits, and it will work for you too. Yes, except people's lives are at risk in an airplane, not with cell phones or hard drives, ladies' garments, or running shoes." And this is just something that it seems everyone missed when thinking about this. It was the Walmart model. Boeing would still get the parts it needed to build planes, but it would get them from smaller, more vulnerable suppliers whose costs could be squeezed and union benefits renegotiated or eliminated. And when they talk about the problem of outsourcing, if your part doesn't quite fit, if you own the part making, and this is something that is positive about Tesla's vertical integration. If you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link to the Elon Musk review. But this is something positive that Tesla does, is that there's a problem with the part, they just go down to that part of the factory and say, "I need you to fix this part." But if you have a contract with someone that you've outsourced this to, and it doesn't say in your long legal contract that something has to be fixed, it's going to cost you a fortune to fix it. Design specifications, the basic point was that outsourcing is never simple. Design specifications actually had to be more precise because any omissions would lead to costly disputes involving lawyers. Making sure the work got done right led to additional overhead costs that no one had counted on. Finally, all those extra costs had the perverse effect of making the company doing the outsourcing look less efficient than the ones it awarded business to, a vicious cycle that only encouraged more of the same destructive behavior. And what were some of the quality issues? Well, they're sprinkled all throughout the book, but this is just one that you would see frequently if you Google. I'll put a link in the description to an Al Jazeera documentary, a hidden camera documentary, in which workers in a Boeing plant talk about things that they've seen and the fact that they wouldn't fly on these planes. Hobeck called over an inspector who quickly found 40 problems. Other employees described defective manufacturing, debris left on planes, wrenches, metal slivers, even a ladder, and pressure not to come clean about it. And what's another mechanism? Instead of investing in better quality of the planes or even developing a new airframe, instead of just redoing the 737 over and over with new engines, Why not design a new airplane to compete? Instead, they were interested in stock buybacks. The first move of the new CEO after the merger was a familiar one. Boeing would spend as much as $4.5 billion to buy back 15% of its shares. And if you aren't familiar with stock buybacks, they're a way to make a stock more popular, but they don't deliver. I mean, they deliver money to shareholders, but they don't deliver necessarily upgrades to the company. While they pressured the engineers for savings, Boeing enriched shareholders, spending $41.5 billion on stock buybacks from 2013 to 2018, enough capital to develop several all-new aircraft had they chosen to. Almost 80% of the free cash during that period went to buybacks. So what is really serving the shareholders? This short-term cash give back, or the investment in 2-3 new planes, which would result in even more profits in the future? Just short-term thinking for both people. Almost 80% of the free cash during that period went to buybacks. McInerney himself made $231 million from 2001. I think this was the CEO from 2001-2016, with a retirement package in the neighborhood of $58.5 million. For his part, Muhlenberg made $106 million from 2011 to 2018. And even when they would kill people through their negligence, Boeing was still working hard to make sure that their lawyers would give the lowest amount of money to those suffering families in compensation. So in a commemoration to the Lion Air victims sometime after the crash, the Indonesian Navy took the families of people who had died aboard Lion Air 610 to sea to leave memorial flowers and pray. When the boat got back to the pier, TV reporters and family members gathered around Edward Strait, Lion Air CEO. He introduced two men standing beside him as our friends from Boeing and said they had a message to convey. We, Boeing, are here and have formed a financial assistance fund. One of them said, adding that Boeing extends its deepest condolences. He provided a phone number where people could contact him to claim the $144,500 per victim in funds and also scholarships. And this was after, right close to the crash, Boeing had pressured families who were desperate for the money to sign the paper, which exempted them from future prosecution, and told them that they couldn't leave the room with the paper, that they had to make a decision in that room. Sanjeev Singh and Michael Indrajana, the two plaintiffs' lawyers who had uncovered the scheme to coerce families into signing blanket releases, were dumbfounded. The men standing with Lion Air CEOs were lawyers for Jakarta-based firms, one of them styled as specializing in legal intelligence. Neither of them mentioned Ken Feinberg, who was managing the supposedly independent assistance fund for Boeing. At least a dozen families had yet to file any legal claims. If those people went to Boeing after hearing the televised pitch, they'd be less likely to hire sharp-elbowed litigators like Indrajana and Singh, who were pushing for much higher settlements. To me, it looked like this very cleverly orchestrated dance, where lawyers were out there going after these last remaining families to clean up liability for Boeing. They were not operating as a charity. A lot more that I can talk about, but it's not a long read. It's about 300 pages. It's a very easy read, compelling, good writing, and as I say, competent across a number of different types of writing, talking about the business case, talking about the technical aspects, and then talking about the human issues, the families that were affected. If you'd like to buy a copy of the book, that's one way you can support the channel. It'll be linked in the description below. Hit like, share, subscribe to the channel. People who are curious about Boeing, this might be a good thing to send to them, or just people who like to find out about corporate scams and irresponsible companies. Boeing is one of those companies. If you'd like to support the channel even more, please consider becoming a member of my Patreon or YouTube members. You'll get early access to videos like this one. You'll have a chance to talk to me behind the scenes about why I choose these books and the process of creating these videos. You also interact with other members of the community. If you'd like to buy a book from my Amazon wish list, that might go on the list for 2025. In 2024, a portion of the proceeds from all these different avenues are going to go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is also linked in the description below. You can go and visit their website, make a contribution yourself, but obviously you can support them indirectly by supporting my channel in some way, which, as I say, could involve sending a super thanks if you'd like after watching this video. As always, enjoy your reading.